there's lots of different types of examples. So we're going to go through all of these. The worksheet you have, I know some of you are wanting a couple more grades. The worksheet you got is a grade tomorrow. It should be easy, I promise. After today, you're going to be like, oh, okay, this is nice. Like, it's kind of a nice little break from what we've been doing. Yeah, it's almost like a second day of something we did last week. What day was that? Maybe like Tuesday? But it adds in something. So it's not complex, I promise. I'll show you. It's not bad. Okay, square root of 16 is 4, and that reason, of course, is because 4 squared is 16. So we talked about when I take the square root of 16, we put it as 4y. Do you remember why we don't put the negative here? The rule, the principal value, positive principal value theorem. You know that one? So, okay, if I just write this and I want you to simplify, square root of 25, you would say it's what? 5. Remember, we don't say it's plus or minus 5. We use the positive, what is it? Principal positive value. I get the P mixed up. Principal positive value. Okay, so when we talk about square root of negative 16, it's not necessarily no solution. What did we say that this is? Not a real number. Not a real number. Okay, do you remember at the beginning, I think it was the beginning of the school year in this class, we do real numbers, and then under real we have our sections. Yes. Okay, so we're moving outside of real numbers today into its own little section. Imaginary numbers. Okay, so what is an imaginary number? Square root of negative 1 is an imaginary number. So here's where we're going to actually be able to simplify negatives under square roots. Square root of negative 1 is an imaginary number. So the square root of negative 1 equals I. So if you've looked at your worksheet already and you saw, well, no, there's no I's. There is, okay. You need to know for sure, and you'll know it real quick. Square root of negative 1 equals I. Yes. Yes. Right. So now, instead of saying, okay, well, square root of negative 16 is not a real number, now we're going to break it down. So if I have square root of negative 16, what's really happening is I have square root of negative 1 times 16. What is the square root of negative 1? I. And what's the square root of 16? 4. So now square root of negative 16 equals 4i. It will give you those two square roots. So we pull out the negative, it's I, and then the yes, ma'am.
Will the I always matter front or back, or will it
Good question. Guys, listen. So the question is, can I write I4 or 4I? Technically, it doesn't matter, but in a little while, we're going to talk about complex numbers and put it together. And it looks, you don't have to write this because we're going to write it in a second. It's going to go like this. So I always put the number first, and then the I is the very last thing. Plus, it always just flows better. Like 4I, I4. I don't know. Okay. So the other thing, if I write what I just wrote up there, and I have negative 1 equals I. If I square this left side to get rid of square root, and I square the right side, what happens to my square root? It goes away. So I get negative 1 equals, what does this become? I squared. Here's the other important thing you need to know. I squared equals negative 1. So you'll never leave an I squared in your answer because it equals negative 1. So far, so good? It's not bad, I promise. Okay, so let's do some examples. So before we start simplifying, because you're basically going to simplify your radicals, but they have negatives in them. If there is a negative, is a negative under the square root. Pull out the I first. So whether you have 3 square roots or you can simplify the square root, you're always going to pull out the I first and then simplify. Whether you're adding or subtracting or multiplying, pull out the I first. Alright, ready for some examples? So we'll start out with some super easy ones. What's the square root of negative 4? 2i. That's it. 2i. So this is good practice for some of you who didn't do well in the quiz, because we're still simplifying radicals. We're just going to have an I in the answer, but everything else is the same. So square root of negative 24. Before you do anything, pull out the negative. So that means instead of negative square root 24, I have I square root 24. The negative goes out and becomes I. Now let's simplify the 24. So what perfect square is in there? 4 times 6. Square root of 4 is 2. So 2i square root 6. Okay, number 3, negative 48x to the 6th. So I just always rewrite it with the I out front. That way then it's basically normal what you've been doing. So I square root 48x to the 6th. What perfect square is inside 48? Let's do perfect squares though. 16 times 3, good. And x to the 6th. So square root of 16 comes out. And what do I do with this x to the 6th? Divided by 2, good. So on the outside, we have 4, x to the 3rd I, square root of 3. Or 4i x to the 3rd. So this one, like I said, I usually put my number first, but then here, the i's and the x's, you can switch those. Is anything missing from our answer? Absolute values, I can't hear it. This is our special case. Even on the inside, even on the outside, and when I divided, I got odd for my x. So the x gets put in jail, kind of. Poor x. Okay, number 4, 7i squared. What does I squared equal? Negative 1. So really, this is just 7 times negative 1, which is negative 7. So never, ever, ever leave an I squared in your answer, because you know what that equals. Number 5, square root of negative 4 times square root of negative 9. So here's where you really want to make sure you pull out the negatives first, because if I multiply these together, I would get square root of 36. The negatives go away. So that's why we pull out the I first. It'll be an I for each one, and then when I multiply, it'll be I squared. So on this, let's go ahead and just simplify this whole thing. What's the square root of negative 4? 2i. And the square root of negative 9? 3i. So if I multiply those, I get 6i squared, which equals negative 6. Did I lose anyone on that? Okay, number 6. Guys, if I go too fast, just say something, okay? Am I going too fast? Yeah, you said something. I am.
No, this entire lesson.
Oh.
Like
It is
all
like
of the above. Like
all too fast?
let's slow down for like a month.
Oh. Alright, well, I can't do that. We're almost at Thanksgiving though.
Yeah, but then we have to come back and do it again.
And then you get Christmas.
I thought we were gonna come back to do it.
Okay, number 6. Just think, this year is better than pre-cal, and then pre-cal will be better than cal. So see, this year's good.
So it just gets worse.
It just gets progressively worse.
It's not horrible. I like pre-cal a lot. Okay, number 6. Let's take down the I first. So this becomes I square root 2. Because I can simplify the 2, so I'll just leave it. Times. I can pull out the I here. Let's simplify that square root 20. That can become 4 times 5. So bring out the 2. So 2I square root 5. So if I multiply these together, on the outside, remember we did this last week, multiply the outsides together first, so that becomes 2I squared. And then multiply what's under the radicals, square root 10. I squared equals -1, so this turns into -2. -2 square root 10. Alright, go ahead and work number 7. I shouldn't say pre-cal and calculus get worse. They're just different. They're not necessarily worse. Did you get -2 square root 14?
Yes.
Yay! That's always good sounds. Okay, number 8. Moving on. We're almost done with basic simplifying. And I'll do some solving. What? I told you today is a lot of just examples, but they're all short. Like, look at that. That's like nothing. Okay, number 8. I don't have any radicals, so I can just go ahead and multiply this. What does this whole thing become?
-24 squared.
-24I squared. Good. I squared is -1. So now what does this become? +24.
An actual answer.
No, I get to burst the rubble.
And not that is go away.
Okay, number 9. At least it's not a lot of work. I feel like that's nice. Okay, so make sure you pull out the I first. So this becomes 3I square root x. And this becomes -7I square root y. So multiply the front part together. -21I squared. And multiply the insides together. Square root x, y. Final answer? Perfect. 21 square root x, y. Okay, let's do some solving. Okay, so in the beginning we talked about the principal positive value, where square root of 16 is 4. So if they write like something like this, we just say, okay, it's just the positive one. So what's going to change here is now they're going to give you an equation. X squared equals 16. How would you get rid of the square here? The square root. So if I take the square root, anytime you are solving an equation and you take a square root, it could be positive or negative 4. And the reason is because in this equation, 4 could be positive, 4 could be negative. Doesn't matter. Okay, so in solving, every time you solve today, you should get a plus or minus in your answer. So, and they're not long, I promise. So first one, x squared plus 25 equals 0. So what would you do first? Subtract 25. So x squared equals negative 25. And then square root. As soon as you square root, I go ahead and write x equals plus or minus. That way I don't forget it. What is the square root of negative 25? 5i. Good. Plus or minus 5i. Okay, number 2. B squared plus 10 equals 0. So subtract 10 first. And what's nice about these, they're always short. There's not really ever much more than this. So what does B equal? I root 10. Plus or minus I root 10. I know, it's a lot of people today. There's a lot. We're killing like a couple trees today. Let's do one more solving one.
Sorry.
4x squared plus 80 equals 0. So nothing's different except there's a 4 in front. So same thing, subtract over 80. So in this case, you could square root first if you wanted to, because 4 is a perfect square. I'm going to go ahead and divide by 4 though, to get the x squared by itself. So x squared equals negative 20. Yes. Square root plus or minus I. Oh, we can't see that. Are we getting better at breaking down our radicals? Good. So bring out this 2. So 2i square root 5. Plus or minus 2i square root 5. Easy for solving? Okay. We're getting closer. We're getting closer. We'll do a lot today. Okay, so far we've only been talking about like when we have i's. Now we're actually talking about complex numbers. But that's what's special about creating. It's just all those pushes together. So complex numbers, because now we're going to combine a real number with an imaginary number, and so it's always written in this form, a plus bi. So this is my real part, and this is my imaginary part. example would just be something like 3 plus 2i, something like that. You just put the real number first and then imaginary. So we're moving into adding, subtracting, and multiplying. Okay, so simplify. We're just going to do one addition and one subtraction because they're pretty easy. And what's nice about this, guys, is it's just like a variable. Like you treat it exactly the same. Can I go up to here? Yes. Okay. So number 1, 7 plus 5i plus -4 minus 6i. All you have to do is combine my terms. It's exactly like if it was 7 plus 5x. So 7 plus -4, 3. 5i plus -6i, -5. That's it. What do you have to do on number 2? Yeah, distribute. And I just rewrite it. I know some of you don't, and that's fine. Whatever works for you. And then same thing. I just wrote something wrong. This. Too many eyes. So 4 minus 2 is 2. 6i plus 7i, 13i. Number 3. What would you do on something like this one? Pull the eyes out first. So I squared 50 plus I squared 18. Can I add these together? No. What do I have to do? Yeah, break them up. So this is 2 times 25. So 5i squared 2. And 2 times 9. Now can I add them? Yes. So what do I get? Good. 8i squared 2. Remember, you just combine the numbers in front. And that's it. You can't simplify it anymore. Okay, number 4. We have I have 2 more on this page, and I have 2 on this page. That's it. I write really big though.
So do I.
Look at that. That's huge.
Do you buy all that paper yourself, or does school provide it? Huh?
She goes out and chops on.
Well, I actually have full stack. People would just leave it around or give it to me. So I just ran out recently, which is why I've gone to these, because they're just extra in my. So I was like, I'll just use these. And then I'll have vegetables. Okay, so let's pull out the i's first. So 5i square root 3. Minus 4i square root 3. So the thing I saw in the quiz is some of you would go to simplify and you forget to multiply with that number in front. So make sure you're careful there. So if we break up this 12 into 3 times 4, I can bring out a 2, which makes this 8i square root 3. So what's my final answer here? Negative 3i square root 3. Perfect. Okay, I only have 2 multiplying ones for you. I know, hang in there, guys. I promise we're almost done.
What happened to just doing addition?
Well, we did addition, subtraction, and multiplying. And tomorrow is division. Just like last week. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, and then division. Okay, number 5. How would you multiply this? FOIL, yeah, FOIL or distribute, whatever. Thank you. So just multiply it out. 28. Nothing changes here. Plus 21i minus 8i minus 6i squared. So instead of it being x's, where we just combine like term, what is this? What happens here? It goes to positive 6, right? So I usually just cross it out, put plus 6 above it. And then combine like terms. So 28 plus 6. Oh, is that 34? And then 21i minus 8i. I had a hard time with this one earlier. 13. Is that right? You don't know? 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Something about that 21 and that 8 caught me earlier. It is intimidating. Wait, why what? I hear So it was negative 6i squared. I squared is negative 1, yeah. So that 28 plus 6, 34.
Yeah.
Okay, one more multiplying one. And then I'm going to blow your minds. We're going to do some weird ones, like I to the 13, I to the 67. No, it's on your worksheet. And you need to make, I want you all to put hundreds on your worksheet. Okay, number 6. You guys can either write it out twice, or you can do the shortcut. So if you want to write it out twice, you can do that. I'm going to do the shortcut. Square the first. 3 squared is 9. Then the middle part, remember, we multiply this together, which will be 6i, and then I double it, so it becomes 12i. And then you square the second, which would become 4i squared. Or you can write it out twice and FOIL. 4i squared becomes negative 4. 9 minus 4 is 5 plus 12i. Okay, are you ready for the last part? Yeah. You are. Did anyone look at their worksheet and see like I to the 50? Yeah, they're weird, but they're not bad. Okay, so before we do anything, let's do this. What is I squared equal? Negative 1. So if I put I squared to the third, then I squared we just said was negative 1. What's negative 1 to the third? Negative 1. What if I had negative 1 to the ninth? Negative 1. What if I had negative 1 to the 21st? Negative 1. Okay, so when you do negative 1 to an odd power, you're always going to get negative 1. What if I have I squared, you don't have to write all this down yet, This would be negative 1 to the 4th. What does this equal? Positive 1. What if I have negative 1 to the 10th? Positive 1. So even, when you do negative 1 to an even, it's positive 1. When you do negative 1 to an odd, it's negative 1. Okay, so that's kind of the start. So let's start with a smaller one. Let's start with I to the 6th. That's not small. Let's start with I to the 6th. So here's what you do. I take this and I divide it by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. And this is how I write it. 2 times 3 is 6. So I'll always put I squared on the inside. Because then from here, like what we just did, I squared is negative 1. And negative 1 to the 3rd is negative 1. So I always do this. I say I divide it by 2. So I can write this part. And then negative 1 to the 3rd is negative 1. If you have, anytime you have a negative 1 on the inside and an odd power, it equals negative 1. And if you have negative 1 and an even, it equals positive 1. It won't. In this case, it won't. Because we're always going to break it down where we have an I squared here. And so then it's going to be even or not out here. Okay, so let's do a different one. Let's do I to the 13th. Okay, now if I divide that by 2, it doesn't come out evenly. So I'm going to split it up into I-12 and I to the 1st. So take this one, because this is the even one, and let's make this one divide by 2. So I squared to the 6th. And then I still have this like lingering I right here. Did I lose anyone yet on what I did? Okay, so let me say it one more time. This one was nice and even, so I just did I squared and then to the 3rd because this is 6. Okay, this one was not even, so I split it up, an even, and then here's my leftover. So the even one I divided by 2, and here's the lingering one. I squared is negative 1. What's negative 1 to an even power? 1. 1 times I is I. I'll write it down here. Negative 1 to an even power is 1. 1 times I is I. Okay, let's do another one. Let's do a bigger one. Let's do a couple more. No, not to go on your worksheet. Isn't that on your worksheet? Yes. Let's do 17. Isn't that on your worksheet? No. Don't lie. Don't lie.
Like all confused.
Okay, let's do this one. Alright guys, let's do one more. Okay, so first thing, this is odd, so I want to split this up so I have an even, so I'll just go underneath 66, and then I have a single I. And that's usually what it is. It's something and then a leftover I. Take the even one, divide it by 2, which is what? 33. And then I have my random I. Okay, I squared is negative 1. So I have negative 1 to the 33rd power. Negative 1 to an odd power is negative 1. So now I have negative 1 times I, which equals negative I. So your answers will be one of 4 things. It will be 1, negative 1, I, or negative I. There's only 4 options here. We didn't have any 2s or 3s or anything. I to the 3rd, nothing like that. Those are your 4 options. Okay, so your worksheet is due tomorrow for a grade. Hopefully a nice, pretty 100.